From KPFK in Los Angeles, California, Valley Free Radio in Florence, Massachusetts, WNUC in Detroit, and BikeTalk.org worldwide, this is Bike Talk.
Bike Talk.
Welcome to Bike Talk. I'm Taylor Nichols.
And I'm Nick Richard.
Hey, Nick.
How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm in a hotel in Missoula, Montana, or otherwise known as Mecca, for people who tour on bicycles, because this is the home of adventure cycling.
Did you coin that it's a Mecca, or are they calling it that?
I'm the first person that I know of that said it, but I can't imagine I'm the first person to say it, because it really is the place that a lot of touring cyclists go to on their way across the country.
Is it like your midpoint?
You know, I don't think it's quite the midpoint, although I did go a long way up the coast and then over. I'm about 1,500 miles in, and I think that the full trip is going to be about 4,000. So I'm a little less than midway mile-wise, but climbing-wise, I think I'm a little past midway. The last 24 hours of my trip encapsulate the highs and lows that people go on, I think, on a trip like this. Yesterday afternoon, I had this beautiful ride up this river valley of the Lochsa River, Lochsa River in Idaho. And Nick, every bend of the road was beautiful. There was no traffic. The river was a whitewater river off to my right and mountains off to my left. I camped at the Clearwater Wilderness Gateway with very few people around, all by myself. Could not have been better. No services, no internet, no Wi-Fi. Then yesterday, I rode up and I had to go over Lolo Pass. So that was hard. You know, the first part was slightly up, but going over the pass was hard. Then I get to the top of the pass. So there's a little bit of a high riding along the river, a little bit of a low going over the pass. Then down the other side of the pass was just a beautiful high. Then I get to these hot springs and I take a hot springs and I soak.
Oh, man.
I know. It was like this is what I signed up for. You know? But then this morning,
Montana.
Yeah, now I'm in Montana, and I lost an hour going from Idaho to Montana. So this morning I wake up.
You lost an hour, like because the time.
Yeah, the time change, going from Pacific to Mountain Time. But this morning I wake up, and it's raining. And it's like, you know, riding in the rain is one thing, but waking up in the rain when all of your equipment, your tent, your bags are all wet is a little bit of a problem, because you don't want to pack it all up wet. And I had no internet, so I couldn't check the weather to see when the rain was going to end and all that. So that was a low that I had to deal with. I was cold. It was wet. I didn't know what the heck I was going to do. But right across the street where the hot springs was a little restaurant that had Wi-Fi. So I went there and had breakfast and coffee, and I felt kind of guilty, like I should be having oatmeal and coffee at my campsite. But then I thought, no, that's stupid. You know, go to the restaurant. And I waited out the rain in the restaurant. And then today I had like a 35-mile ride from Lolo Hot Springs to Missoula, and it was slightly downhill and a tailwind that made me feel like Lance Armstrong on drugs. I'm not kidding. I was flying. I was going 21, 22 miles an hour without even thinking about it. And then it started to rain a little bit, but it wasn't bad, and I was just flying. And so that was a high. But then the low, and this is what I want to end on, a couple of drivers buzzed me. And Nick, I'm riding on a road that 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes go by without a car. So I'm very comfortable riding in the middle of the lane. I can hear cars coming from a mile away. And yet when they do come and they do pass me, 1 out of 10 scares the living daylights out of me by not moving over an inch. And one truck, what do they call it when it goes by and the wind pushes you?
I don't know. Truck wind?
Yes, truck wind or slipstream actually pushed me off the road into the gravel. And, you know, just those two guys that did that almost ruined this perfect 35-mile ride in beautiful country. And I only bring all this up because we want to talk to Jim Pocrass about how we can deal with this, and is artificial intelligence driving driverless cars, could that be one of the answers? Because these two guys ruined this beautiful ride for me. So on that note, we want to welcome Jim Pocrass to the show. Jim, thanks for coming back on. Tell us a little bit about the legal issues around, do we call it AI driving or do we call it driverless?
This is a great subject to be talking about, and I'm really jealous of your trip. However, I think that, what you experienced with the truck and with that other driver is right at the heart of what we're talking about with autonomous vehicles or AI vehicles, vehicles that do not have a driver in it. The heart of all of this is safety on the road. We want safer roads. Okay, is it safer or not safer with an autonomous vehicle that has been programmed with, all these type of software to try to eliminate the problems and the dangers like that you had today, driving too close to you, the speed that they got, making it dangerous for cyclists or even pedestrians where these vehicles may be able to pick up, what is going on the road.
In some states, you have to give the cyclist or the person on the road 3 feet. And in other states, you have to change lanes.
Right. Again, on these autonomous vehicles, they have software and radar that is supposed to pick up a pedestrian or a cyclist and then maneuver themselves in a position where they're safe so that the roads are safer. If
an AV does hit me or some other vulnerable road user, who is responsible? The vehicle owner, the operator, or what?
That's the question of the day. Every crash used to start with the question when they'd come into my office, who is driving? How does that question change when nobody's driving? Okay, so who's responsible for this? Who do you sue? You have to take a look at the circumstances surrounding how the crash took place. So you're looking at the software and what is driving that vehicle and who is responsible for that. And you have to look at both sides of the story. There could be a lot of comparative negligence on the person, the pedestrian, or the cyclist and how they're operating. So if the question is, who gets sued at this point, you have to kind of look at everybody. The vehicle manufacturer, Tesla, Waymo, Cruise, or whoever it is. You look at the software developers, if they're separate from the vehicle manufacturers, the vehicle owners, depending on the state law. Going back to, human safety operators and then parts manufacturers, the people that manufacture the cameras, the radar. There's a thing called LiDAR, like a radar in a vehicle in these autonomous vehicles that sends out a laser type of radar, and then braking systems, steering systems, and look at all of that. Right. So those are the potential defendants in the case.
It sounds like there are multiple industries to sue if a vulnerable road user does get struck by an AV.
That's correct. The legal system is really moving from a driver negligence to a system negligence. The focus for a lawyer now is going to have to be getting information, with regard to vehicle sensors and videos and radars and braking and steering, remote assistant communications, prior DMV collision reports. And that's where we're going to have to be looking at with regard to who we sue. Like I said, when we're suing everybody, from the manufacturer down to the people that make the software and the vehicle owners and the human safety operators. But we're also going to have to take a look at the pedestrians and the riders of cycles to determine, how they're riding. Right. There's still a whole comparative negligence, but that's what I'm going to be looking at. Systems negligence versus driver negligence, and that's going to be a whole different story.
I can't wait for AI to take over some of these truck drivers' jobs. I know that's a bad thing to say, but if AI or autonomous vehicles, now, Nick, I know you have a different viewpoint on this. If they make the roads safer, I'm all for it. Nick, what's your argument sort of against it?
Well, there's the jobs point of view. Personally, I think it's probably inevitable. Like in trucking, I think that's going pretty fast. Driverless vehicles, if they're safer, that's what matters in some ways. But it doesn't really solve the problem of car dependency. It keeps us in cars. It keeps us in multi-ton vehicles, right, with just a person inside. And so that's a lot of energy. It's inefficient. And if you're trying to create more public transportation, people using active transportation, you're not doing anything about the problem of cars.
Of too many cars. However, I think Jim's argument is at least the cars that are on the road could be safer if we can figure out how to hold people responsible for the products that they make. Again, like Jim said, whether it's Tesla or Waymo or whatever.
Yeah.
When I was in Idaho, I did the Idaho stop.
Okay.
Cool.
And I also had lights on my bike, all the reflectors, and I even wore a vest, a bright vest. You know, Jim, it really sounds like there's so much to cover in this. I think we should come back and continue this conversation about whether it is moving us in the right direction with autonomous vehicles. There's lots of other issues besides just jobs, vehicle miles traveled, pollution, all these kinds of things. And I look forward to discussing this topic further.
I'm going to look forward to talking about that too, because if it makes the road safer, then I think that we go toward that.
Well, Jim Pocrass of Pocrass and De Los Reyes, merci beaucoup.
Okay, just have a nice, safe ride, and I wish I was doing that with you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
That was Jim Pocrass of Pocrass and De Los Reyes, and I think it's time for the news, Nick.
I'm Stacy with this week's news. From Chicago ABC 7 News on Friday, June 5th, 35-year-old Chicago DOT employee Riley O'Neill, known for working to make riding bicycles in the city safer for everyone, was killed biking in a paint-only bike lane. Riley is at least the third person struck and killed by a driver while biking in Chicago this year. In Seattle this past Monday, 30-year-old elementary school teacher Christian Sawyer was killed while biking in the intersection of 12th Avenue South and East Yesler Way by the driver of a garbage truck. A protected bike lane was supposed to be built there by 2021, but the blocks in question were removed from the city's plan in 2019. From Streets Block USA, a group of advocates recently announced they've mapped over 2,000 bike parking locations across the Las Vegas Valley as part of a campaign by BikeRackMap.com. Bike racks are often sited on private land, and because most city building codes don't require them, unlike car parking, many local governments have no idea where cyclists can publicly lock up, and cyclists have no choice but to find storage on the go. Check out how to get started in your community at BikeRackMap.com.
You know, I joked earlier that I made it to Mecca, but I did go to the Adventure Cycling headquarters, and I got to meet Josh Bowden, the guy who's in charge of tours and things like that for the ACA. And he gave me a tour of the building, and they have free ice cream. I'll throw that in too.
It's like the Spoken Hostel. You keep running into that.
I love that. The offices of Adventure Cycling have these beautiful spaces for people who are traveling by bike to hang out, clean their bike, fix their bike. There's a reading room with all these books. It's really a wonderful place to spend an hour or two on your journey across the country. Okay, so I made it to Mecca, right? Yeah. Missoula, Montana, and the home of Adventure Cycling. I caught Josh Bowden, who's been helping me with this trip, just as he was getting ready to leave, and he was nice enough to stay. But we're in the building, Josh, that's been the subject of controversy of whether you keep it or not. Mm-hmm. I can see why. It's a beautiful space with all these bikes, but tell me a little bit about the space.
Yeah, so like you said, a little bit controversial, I guess, but it's all about blown over now. You know, got the building and we're here to stay is kind of where we landed. So, and as you can see, like there's bikes all over the walls, a bunch of history here. We've been here for, 20, 30 years, I want to say. So it's kind of become the staple. And like you can see here, we have all these cyclists that come in, we take their pictures, and we do these like official portraits that are very pretty. So a lot of people go out of their way to come here just because it's
I did.
Yeah. You have to. Missoula is not near anything, so you have to come out of your way. But here at the front, when you walked in, you walked by some of the history that before Adventure Cycling was Adventure Cycling, the founders of it, these two couples, did this thing they called the Hemis Tour, which was a ride all the way from the northern tip of Alaska all the way to the southern tip of South America.
Oh, wow.
That was back in the 70s. So like they apparently invented the term bike packing. Like that was the first time it got published and used. And as you can see, like obviously this is audio, so listeners can't see it, but they were riding bikes with like essentially road tires, you know, and they're going through mud and on these dirt roads. So they were gravel riding and bike packing when there wasn't equipment for that, you know, they were hardcore. But out of that came the ride that everyone knows about us, which is the Bike Centennial, the 1976 ride across the country on the Trans Am. So that during their 2-year trip going across the Americas, they had that idea of like, let's gather this thing and celebrate. they did that, and then out of that came what was Bike Centennial, which became Adventure Cycling. Yeah.
Did you meet Kay or not?
Did I meet Kay? I don't think so.
Oh, she was just here like yesterday. Oh, you met her?
Kay was here today.
Oh, she was here today.
Oh, she's here today.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. She's the 71-year-old woman that I met on the route earlier.
Okay.
And
cool.
she did that ride in 1976.
Oh, really? Wow.
When she was 21.
I was going to say if she's 71, man. She was young when she did that first one.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you here.
No, you're good. You can just see some of like the Bike Centennial, the old logo, and some of the old pictures. You know, I always look at this and it's kind of appalling because most people don't have helmets because the first helmet was not made very long before that ride, you know? So it's a little funny to see people wearing just like their trucker hats and their, you know, chino shorts, right?
Well, racers didn't wear helmets even in the 90s. Yeah. I mean, Lance Armstrong was winning Tour de France's without a helmet.
Right, yeah.
With drugs, but without a helmet.
right, yeah. I think he had other things going on than the helmet. But, but we've been here for a long time. In the building, which is, you know, why people care about it so much. And like you said, it is kind of a Mecca for people. Like you have to go very far out of the way to come here just to see like the place that gives them all the information for all of their maps, you know, as going on shows with you, people like you. So does mean a lot to people. So we get it. And, you know, it's nice to have a building, something.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, we won't go into the whole story again, but it sounded like you could have stayed here even if you did sell it. But
that was the hope. Yeah. But, you know, things went a different direction, which is fine. You know, we're still here. We're still plugging along pretty well, and we're doing great this year. So.
Great. I'm really glad to hear that. Tell me more about the space back here and some of these bikes.
Yeah, so the bikes kind of come from all over, and if you like walk around and see most of them, we have those official portraits I was talking about. You can see like they're old black and white.
Oh, yeah.
And even the modern ones, we still keep it black and white because that's our style.
Right.
And then you come with a little blurb, sometimes written by us, sometimes written by the rider we take a picture of. So these will often tell you, these pictures are beneath the bike hanging on the wall. So you can see the story of like, who is this person? What were they doing with their bike? What did their ride mean? And that can kind of explain it.
And this woman you just explained to me is on a around the world race by herself.
Yes.
And she's doing like 250 a day.
Yeah, Lael Wilcox, which some of the listeners might be familiar with, like pretty famous ultra endurance athlete who's now a board member of Adventure Cycling. She gave us one of her bikes from a Tour Divide race from years ago, generous enough to give it to us. We have a beautiful picture, and she wrote a really nice write-up about her ride and kind of the struggles of her ride that year because it was pretty tough for her.
Well, there are lots of struggles in a ride like this. I mean, I'm finding the highs and the lows every day.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I guess that's part of it.
Yeah, but really, like when I first started here, my director for tours that let me in, I remember one day he's like, just walk around and just read like all the pictures, and like that was my job that day, was just read descriptions, because like it helps you remember like, why do we do this job? It can feel sometimes honestly a little frivolous, like, oh, I work to let people go on vacation. But people that do these rides know how special it is and how meaningful it is. So it's nice to see these descriptions from people that have gone by and like what their rides meant to them, and it reminds you like, oh, this is actually really important for people. Like this is like human flourishing at its highest.
Right. Well, I totally agree.
Yeah.
And it really is beautiful. And you have all the maps here and the big map of the country. And you actually helped me a little bit with my next section that I'm going to do. So, Josh, thanks again for everything over the past 6 months.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've been coming on the show.
It's been fun. I love doing this stuff. I just love helping people. So.
And I think last time you were on, you mentioned that you were going on a river trip. How was that?
Yeah, so I did 3 weeks on the Grand Canyon, down to Colorado, and it was awesome. It was both easier and a lot harder than I expected. It was my first raft trip of my life, so it was a wild ride, but it was super fun. Definitely a trip of a lifetime type of thing. And went from never having been in a raft in my life to being able to row up to like class 3 rapids.
Wow,
so
very good.
Progressed pretty quickly.
Yeah, well, I totally understand it being easier and harder than you had expected. So, Josh, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Taylor.
One of the things that we all agree on is that our roads are dominated by cars. And I think you have this interview now, Nick, about this exact fact.
Here is this influential study, Car Supremacy, Deconstructing the Ideology Driving Our Modal Hierarchy.
Ashton Rohmer, you got a study, Car Supremacy, where you looked at a couple hundred public testimonies in Washington, D.C., where, as you put it, private citizens at public meetings are shaping policy for street design, for safe streets. I've always found it amazing that the average person is considered to have equally valid points of view, along with those people who presumably know something about transportation and traffic. In New York, I'm watching this backlash. And this is the other part where you talk about car supremacy as an ideology. In the 31st Avenue bike lane in Queens, this organizer on Reddit, Miser, has identified the opponents as being a hate group. They intimidate people, especially women. They yell things like death to transplants and hipsters. And you really take a look at that in this study, how that's an ideology.
As a point of context, I'm a PhD candidate in peace and conflict studies at George Mason University in DC, and I'm an urban planner by training. And so I come at this from a very unique perspective. I see lots of literature about the dehumanization of bicyclists. So studies showing that people will actually see cyclists as less than human when they're given a scale of 100% human and 0% human. It's less than 100%. You have people that use their vehicles as weapons to injure and kill people on bikes in a very targeted manner. And also systems that don't sometimes even treat that as the crime that it should be. And then you have people who categorize folks as an entire group and make assumptions about them. And in my field of peace and conflict, that happens in sectarian strife and civil wars around the world in ethnic conflicts. And so one of the questions that I've been thinking about is, at what point does something cross into a hate crime? And that was, something that I had posted on Blue Sky. But to get to some of this paper and its genesis, I live car-free in DC, where I see on a daily basis the many harms of cars playing out on our streets. I also noticed that while DC has been pushing forward some meaningful measures, our politicians were canceling promised projects to make streets safe for everyone, including people on bikes. And this was not just in DC, it was a trend in other cities, and I might add in other liberal cities. And also in the world more broadly, it's not just a US phenomenon. The thing is I wasn't seeing lobbyists pushing back in meetings. There weren't people glad-handing congressmen. I was seeing fellow citizens, as you mentioned, opposing these measures. They were having a huge influence on local policymaking, and that's power at play. I was also seeing, lots of facts, lots of tragic stories being shared in these public meetings and not swaying people. And I had the sense that maybe there was some sort of ideological belief system at play, because if you present facts and if you present, harrowing and really tragic stories that people had with personal experiences with violence and car crashes, you would think that that might sink in for folks. We know that many of the varied harms that come from cars exist, and yet we effectively, to your point, allow disgruntled neighbors to dictate our public health policies to not only the detriment of people who ride bikes, but every road user. My use of car supremacy is very intentional to look at the power and the ideological structure. And as we mentioned, I did look at a corpus of 200 testimonies that had been presented at DC Council hearings live. And I looked for testimonies within that group that somehow oppose measures to reduce the speed of or space allocated to cars. I found that 57 of those testimonies had those characteristics. And so then I did a lot of analysis on them. And I found that there were 3 general trends in how people characterized their opposition. And I call these rhetorical devices. I have an example, static scarcity. DDOT is the District Department of Transportation, is trying to do too much with the narrow streets we have. There's no space for bike lanes. There's no space for streetcars. There's no space for bus-only lanes. And there's no space for the yellow and white poles they have erected. Not even those. But DDOT keeps trying to do all those things. The government keeps paying engineers to design the impossible. I'm sure for many listeners of your show, the examples that I share will sound familiar, because we do see this. One of the fun games I like to play now is when I read coverage of especially a backlash debate, but also general debates about challenges to car dominance. We see the same things come up again. But this argument is that street space is fixed and already fully allocated. Of course, they didn't say that there wasn't enough room for cars. That's the assumed kind of default neutral. What it says is that making any reallocation for bikes, buses, or pedestrians that happens is nonsensical or impossible. The second is what I call blame inversion. So this is when people attribute the known dangers of cars, congestion, pollution, crashes, fatalities to bike lanes and people on bikes, rather than to the vehicles that cause them. And I would note in DC and in the US more generally, this tends to be around bikes and bike lanes and bike infrastructure and people on bikes, because those are the most present and potent, if you will, challenge to the dominance of cars on our streets, simply because we don't have large-scale efforts to roll out dedicated bus lanes. It's about bikes here, but that's only because we're trying to put in bike lanes where bike lanes haven't been before. And here's an example that I'll read. Bike lanes will actually make the avenue less safe by causing confusion for drivers, bus passengers, new visitors, and pedestrians. 7,000 cars per day diverting into neighborhood streets will make the side streets more dangerous too, especially for children. What's interesting about this rhetorical device is that I found that oftentimes people actually implicitly reference the car dangers that they were upset about. In this case, cars on neighborhood streets will make the side streets more dangerous. And yet there was still this kind of mental gymnastics to contort it, to blame another mode of transportation. The last one I call nefarious minority. Here's an example. At this point, I have hundreds of data points that show how undemocratic the bike lane agenda really is. I can confidently say the vast majority of bureaucratic agencies have been corrupted by paid activists while silencing citizens who care about their city. This is framing people on bikes or really any road user who challenges the dominance of cars as an unruly, politically connected fringe whose low numbers justify ignoring their safety needs and dismissing their participation in civic processes. So beneath each of these claims is a core belief. The first that's connected to static scarcity is modal culture. So this is the idea that streets should be the domain of motorists. Then when we think about blame inversion, the belief that supports that is auto impunity, that we should ignore all of the harms caused by cars. And then the last, which is tied to nefarious minority, is this belief of modal marginalization, that people who use other modes of transportation shouldn't actually be represented in political processes.
You're using the term ideology, the car supremacist ideology, and the othering of bicyclists. These are all concepts from, race and gender. Are we allowed to use that kind of frame?
Yeah, no, that's a really important question. I did a lot of reading in the literature, and there were a couple of other folks that used supremacy, supremacist in their conceptualizations of this as it related to automobility. In one case, you had someone talking about legal structures that don't penalize the harms of driving the way that we might consider. And so there were other instances of this being used in academic literature. I did get some feedback from reviewers, why not car dominance? Folks like Peter Norton have done a really great job of showing how historically other modes of transportation have actually been posited or framed as subordinate modes of transportation, and that cars were the supreme, best, most legitimate mode of transportation. And so there's a similar mindset shift. Of course, I'm not trying to argue that what happens with automobility is nearly as, detrimental to society as the awful things that have happened with white supremacy and misogyny and that sort of thing. But I think that it's a very helpful framework for us to think more critically about how ideology operates. And the definition that I use in my paper, an ideology is a system of collectively held normative and reputedly factual ideas and beliefs and attitudes advocating a particular pattern of social relationships and arrangements, and or aimed at justifying a particular pattern of conduct, which its proponents seek to promote, realize, pursue, or maintain. So there are beliefs that are used to advocate for a particular pattern of social relationships. And so when I think about a pattern of social relationships, I think of two things. One is, how are people treated in our public streets? And we see people who drive cars using their cars as weapons and targeting people on bikes and other modes of transportation and harming them. We also have the really charged rhetoric that comes out of public meetings. And so this is moving from the public street to public forums, but you have folks that will say very denigrating and threatening things about people who ride bikes. There's a small body of research that's actually around dehumanization of bicyclists and people on bikes. Researchers have found that some respondents will actually rate people on bikes as less than fully human. And so when you take all of these things together, you can see how that pattern of social relationships is being warped by a certain mode of transportation. And that is seemingly the only thing that really differentiates how people are treating each other in these spaces.
There was a quote in your study, Robert Davis, in Death on the Streets, Cars and the Mythology of Road Safety, where he said, it can be argued that it's much more necessary to see car use as something which requires checking than attitudes on gender or race, because the very fact that even particularly careful motorists can kill through a moment's negligence makes this in some ways more of a necessity than the examination of power and ideology surrounding other social issues. And that's a strong statement. But when you consider, over 40,000 people killed a year by cars and over 1 million worldwide, and the number one killer of children, there needs to be some checking of people's worldview or their ideology.
When you consider that transportation is all around us, that it's something that we always have to engage in every day, that means that we are constantly put into these conflict situations. And not only that, but our built environment foments these conflict situations day in and day out. It permeates most aspects of our society. And that, I think, is what Robert Davis is getting at, is that even careful motorists, can have something happen. And it's also so normalized in our society that we don't realize how many ways it has worked its way into our structures, our culture, and even our individual behavior. When I get someone mouthing sorry as they plow through a crosswalk and I'm trying to cross as a pedestrian with a walk signal, and it's a near miss, close pass, and that's the best of it. I've had people purposefully, speed into me when I'm walking into an intersection as a way to control and intimidate my movement in those spaces. And so all of the ways that conflict ripples through society, it's ever present, and it's however unwillingly or unintentionally folks contribute to it or participate in it. We're all enmeshed in it merely because of, transportation being such an integral part of our lives.
Car supremacy hurts people who drive, too.
This is one thing that I looked at in the paper in DC over the past however many years since Vision Zero was committed to. I think it was 2015. Pedestrians are always the category of deaths that is highest. And the second highest is drivers and car occupants. And so when we design streets that prioritize the speed and storage of vehicles over the safety of all road users, we all are worse off from it. And it's not just crashes, it's air and noise pollution, it's environmental degradation, it's climate change, it's old folks who, when they lose their license, the mental impacts of losing a license are as bad to older folks as a terminal cancer diagnosis, because we have built our communities in such a way that there's so much fracture in our social fabric and in our ability to access places without using a weapon every time that we go out into the world, if we aren't lucky enough to live in a city like DC that has some decent public transit and bike and walking infrastructure. Getting back to some of what we were talking about earlier, one of the things that happens in racially divided societies like the US is that people who adhere to white supremacist beliefs will often try to pit different groups against each other so that those groups do not focus their attention on the white supremacy culture and society that causes all of the harms in the first place. And so to make a little bit of a parallel here, I've talked with folks and seen in my own experience that there are often debates where people who ride bikes, bus riders, pedestrians are pitted against each other. And I think in the advocacy space, sometimes we reinforce this when we have just a bike advocacy group or just a pedestrian advocacy group. I would like for there to be a multimodal advocacy group, and also, frankly, one that invites in drivers who are willing to look to data and lived experience of others. Because here's the thing, I don't know of any public street in Washington, D.C. where cars are not allowed. And there's this propensity to think, oh, if there's one bike lane that is built, that is protected, it means game over, no cars ever allowed again. And that is, I don't think, what most people who advocate for bike lanes want. They just want a safe place to bike. And maybe that means just reducing speed limits across a wide range of streets. And that would be effectively a bike lane, because if it's a low stress network, most of the time you can bike there. Doesn't mean that cars can't drive. It just means you have to slow down a little bit. And so there's this zero sum mentality that often gets introduced that I think really warps the discourse in an unfortunate way.
Thanks a lot, Ashton.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great to chat.
The car supremacy model is one way of looking at it. You can look at it as an addiction. You can see it play out in all of the road calming projects. You saw it near you.
On Willoughby, on Fountain, how dare you take away space from storing my vehicle, from letting me drive my vehicle as fast as I want.
And now there's a big win in New York City on 72nd Street. There's going to be an east-west two-way protected bike lane, but they had to take away some curb space to do it. And so there was some backlash. And we talked to Carl Mahoney about it, and he's been on the show before, and here he is again.
Yeah, Carl's great, and he's been fighting the good fight for a long time.
Carl Mahoney, director of Streetstopia, Upper West Side, with Open Plans. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, quite good actually, after Tuesday's vote. Community Board 7 had the full board meeting to discuss the proposed safety upgrades to West 72nd Street, which include a two-way protected bike lane. We spoke a couple of months ago when it passed the Transportation Committee, but this was the full board. This is 50 members of community boards. Each community board has 50 members. It's big. This was advertised in the council members' email newsletter. We put a call to action out. There were some pretty vocal opponents. We filled the room, 170 seats roughly, and dozens were turned away. It was a big event, 3 hours, but the community board voted in support of DOT's proposed changes to 72nd Street. I think a huge win for advocates who've worked on this for at least 6 years, probably more, and a huge win for the community. It's just this basic infrastructure that we honestly shouldn't have to have a 3 hour long meeting and scream at each other to get installed.
It's on 72nd Street in New York City, Manhattan, going from Riverside Park to Central Park on the west side.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about it. It's going to connect these two incredible resources, these two incredible green spaces that contain probably the two most used greenways in the country. And right now there's nothing connecting them. It's a half a mile between the two. And if you want to get there, you have to ride in the street. You choose your poison. There's a bunch of blocks, but none of them as direct as 72nd Street. It's a cycling artery that's used now, even without the infrastructure. As a vehicular transportation route, it's really quite underutilized. There's 4 wide lanes of traffic, 2 in each direction. Cars lining each curb, as we see too often still. Some of it metered parking, but a lot of it alternate side, as we call it in the city, which is free parking. One of the things that's worth pointing out that the DOT has proposed, and they've taken feedback from stakeholders, is to eliminate all alternate side parking along this stretch of 72nd Street. So everything will now be metered, either passenger metered, commercial metered, or loading zones of some type. And that's going to really help with this chronic double parking situation. And this bike lane sort of fight that we're always getting into, it's a curb management issue as much as it is a transportation issue. Yes. We need to manage that curb differently so that we can take that space that's already available in the street. 72nd is a great example of that. And just reallocate some of it. So that curb management piece is key. And I think that's the thing that DOT is focusing a lot on in the next couple of weeks. We're hoping that implementation will happen later this summer. That's the plan.
But when God made those parking spots, Carl,
right?
His intention was that it remained parking.
Yeah, that's a good point. You would think that that were the case based on some of the comments. Although I will say, this is the first bike lane fight where parking has not been the predominant narrative, at least the loss of parking. This one, because it's a pretty active commercial corridor, it's been curb access for delivery vehicles. And also there's some residential blocks, plumbers, HVAC dudes, whatever. That has really been the largest theme in practical opposition. Very little about loss of parking, which almost is concerning. maybe they've missed that part and they're going to come back and yell about it. Or maybe it shows that we've kind of moved on a little bit from that. There have been efforts like with the trash containerization pilot program that's being rolled out citywide now over several years. City bike docks, daylighting. People are getting used to the fact that maybe that curb space isn't in fact ordained by God.
That's the static scarcity idea of the researcher we talked to in this episode, Ashton Rohmer, that the streets are fixed now that they've been designed for cars.
Right. So every project like this changes that in people's minds, socializes the idea that that is in fact not the case.
But you had a lot of opposition. it was such a contentious topic. Did they all really care that much about curb access for HVAC guys?
Yeah, that might have been a little bit of a straw man for some of them. I think there was good faith concern, is still good faith concern about curb access for deliveries. I do think that's something that the DOT needs to work out. And as a matter of citywide priority, they are featuring curb management in all of their projects. They're actually developing a team. I don't know if it's going to be an office or a unit, but a curb management team within DOT dedicated. They haven't had anything like that to date. It's just been these disparate, folks within different units within DOT. So that's an indication of how seriously they're taking it. That's one argument that's in good faith. But then you've got, it doesn't matter if you're in San Diego or Seattle or Des Moines or Boston or Brooklyn, it's the same arguments that you've probably heard a million times. Emergency vehicles won't be able to get to our street. This is going to create traffic chaos. The air is going to be fouled. Seniors and children are going to be mowed down by errant e-bikes and tourists on city bikes. All of this stuff that is demonstrably false. You could rebut every single point with data. And in fact, in the meeting that was done on some of these points, doesn't change that group of folks' mind. And I think in New York in particular, I know this is a nationwide issue right now, but e-bikes, micromobility devices, I say that because e-bikes are not the worst offender in some ways. They're the most ubiquitous. But in New York, we've got these stand-up scooters. There was that horrific crash on the Queensboro Bridge that did not involve an e-bike. That involved a stand-up scooter that could go 53 miles an hour and a regular bike. So that adds to this swirl of sort of paranoia. And in some cases, I think there's the xenophobic and, maybe racist component, even if it's unconscious. There is very much an othering that happens in these arguments against a project like this that I think just really do a disservice to the process and to the people involved in just trying to make their city better, including the DOT, who has to hear this stuff and get accused of all sorts of terrible things.
Is this just some aspect of human nature that gets poked when a traffic calming project happens?
Change is hard, right? Like your street might suck, but it's your street and you're used to it. I think we see that with the businesses in particular. They get their deliveries through a completely dysfunctional system. The double parking on 72nd Street, all of the Upper West Side, honestly, is off the charts. And there's a ton of upstream stuff that has to happen to just change how stuff gets loaded onto trucks and distributed, what times of day. But the idea that a shoe store, the proprietor of the shoe store, said that this will put him out of business, this bike lane will put him out of business because of the delivery issue, which is obviously ridiculous, and it'll be fun to follow up with him on that. But the idea that a shoe store has to get deliveries constantly through the day from like 5 different vendors, 10 trucks each or whatever it is, it's a crazy way to run a city. And it's no way to manage a business either, right? Because you've kind of constantly got people taking deliveries. So all sorts of like systemic issues lead to this like double parking problem. But long way to get back to your point, the human nature part, the shoe store or whatever the business, they have figured out how to operate within the dysfunction. So when you shift that dysfunction to something else, even if it's going to be better, their hackles go up and they're like, how is this going to affect my operations? From a resident perspective too, it's sort of similar. Like, I'm used to the street the way it is. This represents a threat to my understanding of my neighborhood, how I interact with this street that is honestly not serving anybody terribly well. These changes will be better, no question. But it's hard for people who don't have a vested interest in the change, or they do, but they don't see it, to come to that. Some of them, not all. And I think that's another thing worth pointing out. At this community board meeting, there was this sentiment expressed by some of the board members that we've heard from the community and they don't want this, when that's very much not what was said in the meeting. It was about a 50-50 split, maybe a few more proponents than opponents. But the sentiments against were just loud and aggressive and dominating and vitriolic. So they certainly stood out more, but they did not remotely represent the Democratic vote count, what people want, not to mention who has the ability to show up at 6:30 on a Tuesday night to attend a 3-hour meeting, right? That's also sort of, selecting for people who fear change.
There's also a question about, why do ordinary people of any kind get to decide how a street is designed? Like, is that not a skill? Is that not it's something that you would have to read a book about or of some kind, or
absolutely? Totally. I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's been driving me crazy for this entire process over the last couple of months. Once they presented to the community board, everybody is suddenly a traffic planner and an urban designer, but with no information, just vibes, right? That's not to diminish like what that sort of lived experience, the rich, nuanced understanding of a block or an intersection, what people who live there can sort of contribute to that conversation. But the project itself, this is infrastructure. We don't debate, whether we're going to change a sewer pipe and ask everybody if that's cool. And if, it flows from one side to the other. It has to be continuous.
Or a highway.
Or a highway.
You don't have that same kind of public input about how it should be.
Totally.
And you don't get it removed after a public backlash either that easily.
Right. I mean, if only, right? That's a larger project. But this gets to that thing that you asked about, is this human nature? I do think there is this emotional response to change. We heard a lot, too, that this is being imposed on us. People would say, I live on 72nd Street, and this is being imposed on me. Nobody asked me personally, Clyde or Sally or whatever their name was, like what I thought. And while I do think there are ways to improve the public engagement process, everybody doesn't get a say or a veto over public infrastructure. The New York City Department of Transportation, with our current mayoral administration and the current commissioner, I'm noticing a shift where the community board is no longer a veto point. It is one venue to collect public feedback. There's some theater involved, obviously, as we saw Tuesday night, but even the vote itself is not necessarily an opportunity to veto the project or approve the project. It's feedback that they can, in their best professional judgment, take or leave.
All right. So the redesign has been approved by the board 26-19.
That's right. Which is a huge win. I mean, it definitely makes it a lot easier for DOT to move ahead, because they can say that they have the community board's approval. Interestingly, no elected officials have come out in support or in opposition to it. They probably understand that it's happening, and they're waiting to just let it happen without getting involved because of the vitriol. So we get into this sort of like back to the opposition being really aggressive and mean-spirited in a really upsetting way. There were some folks who came to this meeting that I spoke with afterwards who don't come to community board meetings. They're not used to this, and their jaw was on the floor at how rude people can be to other people when they feel cornered like that over a bike lane, which I think was also really confusing to people. Like, this is just basic stuff. But every project like this brings out these people who really just are opposed to change for them. We heard that a lot too. I'm not opposed to bike lanes, just this bike lane.
I'm an avid biker, but did you hear that one at all?
Oh, yes. Yes. A woman went up to speak in opposition with her bike helmet, like around her bag, prominently displayed, talked about how much she rides. But I follow the rules of the road, and all of these other people, these delivery workers, these people on e-bikes. Yeah. All of this demonizing, this othering that just does not help. We'll
check back in with you, Carl. Congratulations. You've been working on this for a long time.
Thank you. Yeah, it feels good to get a tangible win. And let's hold our breath a little bit until late summer. I'd love to check back in and tell you how it's working once it's on the ground.
All right. Holding my breath.
Thanks,
Carl.
I want to end, Nick, with one more interview from the road. When you're doing a trip like this, you meet people and you leapfrog each other, and they pass you and you pass them, and you see people going the other way, and you say to someone that you're riding along with, oh, did you meet Erwin from the Netherlands? And they say, oh, yeah, or Mark from Germany, or whatever it is. These couple of kids that I met about a week and a half ago in Prineville, Oregon, and then I met them again in Idaho, and I finally got them on tape.
Okay, so I'm in Stites, Idaho, and I ran into two people who we spoke to in Prineville when we were at the Good Bike Company, but I was too stupid and didn't hit record. Hey, tell me your all's names again and where you're starting from and where you're going to.
So I'm Jenny, and we are starting in Portland, Oregon, and then we went to the coast, and now we're going to Portland, Maine.
Ah, that's right. And you are?
I'm Vince, and we're on the same journey.
Yeah, well, you guys are on some journey. You're camping the whole time, it looks like.
Mainly camping. National forests.
Yeah. So dispersed camping and all that.
Yeah, and then we got lucky. Everywhere in Idaho, it's been like city parks that let bikers stay. Where were we last night? What was it?
Grangeville.
Yeah, they had an awesome city park that was like, there's a whole section for bikers only. That was very
really?
cool.
Oh,
Nice.
I was in a hotel last night.
Ooh, nice.
Well, just because I was so whipped, because the day before we both did White Bird Hill, which was really tough.
Yeah, the hill is a little misleading on that.
Yeah, mountain.
When you look to your side and see Whitecaps, and then you see that it's called White Bird Hill,
right?
You know, it's a little demoralizing there, but it was. There was a race going on that day, which we stumbled into, and that seemed to help our spirits a lot, because you would just have these people flying by who were so jazzed that we were doing this bike tour, and we just happened to be in the same place at the same time as they're like on these titanium or whatever.
Yeah, super light.
Carbon steel, whatever. Yeah, just flying up this mountain.
Yeah. I think they call it For the Hill of It. Was the name of the race. Yeah. I'm so bummed that I missed that. Because I could have used that extra little help.
They also gave us cookies at the top, which was really nice. Yeah. But we heard the fastest time up that, it was 10 miles, like 2,600 feet of elevation. And the fastest time in that race was 70 minutes.
Wow. I think it took me 3 hours.
And
I'm not kidding.
That's about what it took us. Yeah.
Well, tell me, you guys also just said that you noticed something different when you got to Idaho. I wonder if you could explain that.
The drivers they're mean. They don't pull over.
Like
No. I've switched to, I don't even ride in the shoulder's so narrow anyways. So I've kind of just ride in the road a little bit because they don't get over.
Yeah, I think that's safer actually.
Yeah, that was kind of how I felt about it. So.
And someone told me that this next stretch that we have going to Kuski and then over Lolo Pass into Montana is also tough, just in the sense that the road is really narrow. Are you worried about that, or do you guys plan it out enough in advance, or tell me how this is going?
Yeah, we don't. There is a general plan, but we don't really know what our future holds at any given point.
Every day there's like an hour of like, what are we doing today? So,
I guess our biggest worry is between Cusca and like some lodge. The map says there's like not many services.
Right.
But it looks like there's some campgrounds, so hopefully we can get water there.
Yeah, someone did tell me that they actually, some of them don't have water either. So when I get to Kuski, I'm going to fill up my water.
Totally.
And then I'm going to try to go to Knife's Edge Campground tonight.
Okay.
Which is, I think, another 20 miles or something like that after Kuski. And Kuski's 10 or something from here, I'm not sure. But
okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's we're probably a little further than that, just gonna find some place in the forest.
Right.
Yeah, like every night.
Oh, that's so great. Well, I hope to run into you all again further down the road. Are you going to stop in Missoula, or?
Yes. We're stopping in Missoula, and then we were hitting on the Parks, Prairies, Peaks route to get to Minneapolis, and then we'll be taking a little bit of the northern tier, a little bit of our own mapping. So we were going to go through like Wisconsin rather than like Iowa, and then we'll figure out how we get to
Portland, Maine. Oh, that's so great. Hey, really quick, tell me how old you are.
I am 25 in a couple days.
Oh, almost happy birthday.
I'm 23.
Great. Well, have a great trip. I hope to see you again.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, hope to see you too.
So on the theme of you running into people, Kay had come into adventure cycling the same day that you did, right? And
she signed in just before I did. I missed her by like a half an hour, but she actually did something very smart. She took transit from, I'm not sure exactly where in Idaho, to Missoula, because she was worried about some of the routes, that they were not safe and maybe even a little bit too difficult for her, but mainly because they were not safe. And so we run into each other again. And Kay, if you remember, is the 71-year-old woman who's doing the Trans-America route for the second time.
And didn't she mention that she had someone help her on the road, and then she went somewhere where they'd already ran into him and he told them about her?
Yeah, exactly. And I think you said it best last week when you said these are the kind of people that you meet on a trip like this, people who are open to helping you with a ride, helping you with a place to sleep for the night, helping you with a spare tube or something like that. And Kay has relied on that a couple of times, and it's been really nice, as have I.
So this trip sounds like it's as advertised. I mean, it sounds like it's changing your life.
It's harder than I thought it would be at times, and more beautiful than I thought it would be at times, easier than I thought it would be at times, and funner, if that's a word, than I thought it would be at times. So I don't know that it's changed my life yet, but it's changing my life as I do it, I think.
Well, I guess people travel when they're young to learn about the world, to learn about people. And this is a great way to do it. But when you're traveling, when you've already met all kinds of people, I guess you don't have your mind expanded in that way because it's already expanded.
That's a great way to put it. I think there's room for more expansion and meeting more different kinds of people. Like I don't know if I said this earlier to you or someone else, but I met all these guys on motorcycles. And, they were so fun. They gave me some water. They had water, and we stopped and talked for a while. And I said to them that I'm riding across the country to go see my 101-year-old dad. And without missing a beat, one of the bikers said, well, you better hurry up. That was a fun interaction.
Yeah. Good show.
Absolutely. We want to thank Jim Pocrass, and we want to thank Josh Bowden, and we want to thank Carl Mahaney, and we want to thank Ashton Rohmer, and we want to thank the kids that I hope will continue to see on my route. And of course, we want to thank our regulars, Julie Richard, Josh Hagelin, Kevin Burton, Amy Ziering, Lindsay Sturman, Stacy Randecker.
Is there a quote?
It's harder than I thought it would be and easier than I thought it would be. And biking is at the speed of observation.
Thanks, Taylor. See you next week.
Good show.
Ride safe.
That's my line.
Yeah.
This episode of Bike Talk is sponsored by the law offices of Pocrass and Talos Reyes, with offices in Los Angeles and Bakersfield and serving all of Southern California.
Bike Talk is a project of CRSP and the Los Angeles Eco-Village Institute. And that was Bike Talk. If you have a story, a tip, or a topic, head over to biketalk.org and send us a message. Talk again next week.
Get on your bike, sit on the seat, put your feet on the pedal, and run all around, run all around. Get on your bike, sit on the seat, put your feet on the pedal, and run all around, run all around. Get that car out of my way, I wanna ride my bike today. Keep me fit, get me there, I won't go stinking up the alley behind the daily grind. Let your mind unwind, if it's life, pretend to life, better get yourself a bike. Get yourself a bike. Oh, 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 get yourself a bike.